And
Dennis Ross and McCusker.
Yep.
How did,
here we go. Hi, everybody. This is Debbie Hockman from the David Posnack JCC, and I am welcoming you to another of our book discussion with Lynda Levin, our partnership program with the Friends of the Sterling Road Library. And as you know, and I say it every month, but one of our favorite partnerships that we really love, and of course, bringing the lovely Lynda Levin now live and in person once, a second time on Zoom. And you even have the option, if you missed that, to ask me for the recording, which we're going to do today, and see that again. So thank you, Lynda, for always making this a wonderful time and all the energy that you put into this, and the really you bring these books alive. And I know I wrote to Kathy Rosen that, you know, it'll as always be a wonderful review, and it's engaging, and really thank you for that you do this every month.
We've got a great group here, Debbie, and we really do. We have a great group.
We do.
And you're amazing, by the way, as a technological expert. You're the maven when it comes to tech. So thank you for that. Okay.
The other thing I just want to make sure that people are aware about, Lynda, is that next month we are doing a little bit of a shift, and it shows on the computer when you register. But in case you did register already, I'll be sending an email. But next month, the in-person will be on Tuesday, August 16th, but the Zoom is going to be on Wednesday, which is definitely a change for us. So Wednesday, August 17th. And it's going to be in the morning, which is also different for us. So we will be sending out a notice about it to anybody that registered already. And if you haven't registered already for Oil and Marble, we encourage you to do that after today's program. And on the JCC website, it's already up and ready to go. And I'm going to let Lynda talk about the upcoming book after that. But I just want to remind everybody, if you could put your microphone on mute for now, and then when the book discussion, when Lynda asks questions, you can unmute yourself and be a part of the conversation. But at this point, it helps us if you would mute, because we can hear everything going on in your background. And sometimes that can be a bit distracting. So for everybody, if you don't mind doing that. Yes, Evie?
Question, will it be, do you know whether it'll be the same Zoom link on the 17th of August?
It will be.
Thank you.
Yes, it will be the same Zoom link. Okay, so Lynda, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm so glad to see everybody. And I'm really looking forward to some upcoming books. The one that's coming up, Oil and Marble, I think you'll enjoy that. And in September, we've got a really wonderful book, really well received. It's called A Beautiful Country. Has anybody read that one yet? Yeah. Did you read it, Debbie? Did you enjoy it? And Judy? Yeah. Good.
Not only did I read it, but we had the wonderful author here it was in the spring, and she was in our HLC, and it was a very special program. So I encourage you all to read it. It'll be a great discussion.
Good. Okay. So looking forward to that. And maybe you guys will remember some of the insights that the author shared at that time too. So that's great. So that's A Beautiful Country coming up in September. So we have a good reading coming up, and we know we'll have good discussions as well because of the nature of our group here. I want to begin by talking a little bit about the author. Janet Skeslien Charles wrote one previous book. It was called Moonlight in Odessa, and that too was an award-winning project for her. She's written other articles for magazines, but the Paris Library is actually her second book, and it's a New York Times, Washington Post, and USA Today bestseller. It was one of 5 finalists for the 2021 American in Paris Library Award. I saw several online interviews with the author, and in all of them, she talks about how this book came to be. And she talks about the characters. So one of the characters, if you remember from the book, is Lily. And she starts out by telling us that she knows Lily very well. Of course, Lily is a fictional character, but the reason she knows her so well is that she herself, the author, grew up in a very small town in Montana, very similar to Freud, as she describes in the book. And the author remembers her own desperation of trying to get out of town. She says the idea for this book began in that same small town where she lived on the same street as a French war bride. She says she was intrigued by that woman, how she had left her country, her family, her friends, in order to marry a GI she didn't even know very well. She was so brave. Her accent was so beautiful, it even made English sound beautiful. And of course, the author says she loved learning French from her. And so she says the idea for this book actually began when she met her own war bride when she was only 10 years old. She was motivated in college to not only be an English major, but also to major in French and Russian. She did use her Russian. She taught in the Ukraine for a while, but then she moved to Paris as a teaching assistant, planning to be there only 1 year, ended up meeting her husband there and staying on, eventually becoming the program director for the American Library, which is, of course, the library featured in our book today. She said it was such a wonderful match for her working there. She felt that she really belonged somewhere. When colleagues told her the story about the courageous librarians who resisted the Nazis and stood up to the Nazi book protector, remember that the fictional character, of course, is Dr. Fuchs, but there was a real library protector, and that librarian and those librarians, all of them stood up to this book protector during the occupation. And when she heard of their bravery, she knew that this story would be a novel, and she quit her teaching and she sat down to write it. The book interweaves this story of Lily in Montana with the lives of these very real people, the library members, the subscribers, the staff, who grappled with a lot of really heavy-duty moral questions. What seems like they should be very obvious choices, sort of black and white, actually, when it comes down to it, end up becoming murky shades of gray. People had to make decisions, they had to make choices, and we all do wonder, would we have made the right choice? Would we have been on the right side of history? How would we have behaved? And what she's come up with, and the author tells us her response is that no one really knows for sure what circumstances would demand of us. Regarding the characters, Odile, like Lily, is actually a fictional character, but she is based on a real live, generous, wonderful, kind Parisian bookseller who loved selling books in Paris that were written in English and that catered to the English-speaking community. What's interesting also are the stories about the real characters, the real directress, Miss Reader, and of course the librarians, Mrs. Turnbull, who was one of them. And we know we're going to meet Boris. All of these were real people. And what the author tells us is one of her great joys, which is she really contacted all of these relatives of these people. She was able to find them, meet them, and hear their stories. And she said one of the greatest compliments was paid by Boris's grandchildren, who said they actually did remember spending time in that library. And according to his children, who are still alive, of course, well into their 80s at this point, but a lot of them have said that she really captured the essence of Boris and of the library itself. She did a lot of research. She spent a lot of time in the Holocaust Museum in France, and she spent time in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and she learned everything about Paris in 1939. She found all kinds of archived information, documents and articles, and she even found some very top secret correspondence that Miss Reader had written all about her life and what was happening in the library during the war. She says she's in awe of these librarians who stayed in France when most people fled Paris as the Nazis got closer. And she says even when the American ambassador came and told Dorothy Reader she had to close down the library and leave, she refused, she stayed. And so it's interesting, the author says that in Paris, most of the streets are named after men. And she wanted to write this book to honor this amazing woman, the director of the library, Dorothy Reader. She says this book also to her is a love letter to libraries and bookstores and book people. And this is a quote from her. She says, "In these difficult times, we need the sanctuaries of bookshops and libraries more than ever." Okay, so brief summary, you all remember the story, Paris Library, true story, of course, about these heroic librarians. And we're going to meet Odile Souchet. She's young and ambitious, and she's got a dream job at the library. She's got a wonderful policeman as a boyfriend. And of course, her life changes when the Nazis come. But she and her librarians go ahead and make a very special choice, and that is to keep the library open. And in a way, they are all engaging in their own unique resistance. When the war finally ends, instead of liberation and instead of joy, all of a sudden what Odile finds is betrayal. And she ends up making choices, of course, that alter her life in probably the most unexpected ways. The second narrative that's interwoven is that of Lily, this little 13-year-old girl whose mother, and this, by the way, takes place in the 1980s, as opposed to Paris in the 1939. The second story is Lily, 1980s in Montana. And this is a young girl whose mother in the story is very ill, and early on she dies, and Lily is lost. She's grieving, she's lonely, she wants to get out of Montana, and she wants to reinvent herself. She's also very curious about this neighbor of hers, this woman that everybody talks about as the war bride, and she's fascinated with her beautiful language. She wants her to teach her French, and she sees how reclusive she is. Of course, what we learn is that Lily and Odile manage to save each other at the end of the story. So, having given you this background, let me ask you, first of all, how did you feel about the book? Were you engaged? Yeah, I see nodding. Tell me, what do you think? Judy, what do you think? Unmute yourself, Judy.
I found it very interesting. I really enjoyed it. I was just very sad at the end for the main character to give everything up and leave Paris.
Yes, yes.
That was just so sad.
Very sad, very sad. Okay, anybody else have any comments about it? What did you think about her style of writing, her use of language? Did you think her dialogue was realistic? Any comments? Yeah, do I see a hand go up? I can't see who that is. Go ahead, Diane.
No, I was just going to say, I must have really enjoyed the dialogue because reading it was effortless. I felt like I was part of the story, and I enjoyed it very much. It was very engaging.
Right. Eva, did you have something to add to that?
Not really. She said exactly what I wanted to say. I did enjoy it very much, and I did feel part of the story, and I felt very badly for Undine all along. She made one mistake, and that, cost her so much.
And she paid so dearly for that one mistake. One of the things that I really liked about the book, parts of it I found more engaging than others, but one of the things I really enjoyed was her use of language in certain sections. And one of the sections that was most moving to me was when she talks about Lily and her grief. And I'm going to read you what I think is so beautiful. She says, "Grief is a sea of your own tears. Salty swells cover the dark depths. You must swim at your own pace. It takes time to build stamina." Her dialogue continues. She says, and now this is Lily, okay? "Some days my arms sliced through the water and I felt things would be okay. The shore wasn't so far off. And then one memory, one moment would nearly drown me, and I'd be back to the beginning, fighting to stay above the waves, exhausted, sinking in my own sorrow." Beautiful language, isn't it? Describing this little girl mourning the loss of her mother. I thought there was a lot of realism in this too. I love the idea, the way Lily speaks, like a real 13-year-old. I think a lot of the dialogue was was very real. I love the friendship between Mary Louise and Lily as well. And there's one part that I really did love. I loved the part where Eleanor, who is the soon-to-be second wife, if you recall, right? She's going to be the second wife. Eleanor goes ahead and reaches over and takes a teacup that had been Lily's mother's very favorite cup. And all of a sudden, Mary Louise, her best friend, is standing there. And Mary Louise, she says, Lily thinks, Mary Louise spoke my anger, my hurt, and my heart. And Mary Louise whispers, that bitch thinks she can come in here and take anything she likes. Remember this scene? And with that, she goes ahead and sweeps her hand over, knocks over the cup. Cup falls breaks and falls all over the floor. The father says, why would you do such a rotten thing? And Eleanor, this soon-to-be second wife, can't understand. Why did he get so worked up? She says, after all, it's only a cup. And she takes a broom and she, quote, sweeps up my mother's remains. So I think there's a lot of really beautiful reality in there. Okay, any other comments about style? So of course, what would you say overriding themes? Just kind of call out overriding themes in this book.
Communication.
Communication, huge, absolutely. Or lack of communication, right? Yeah, what else?
Family.
Poignancy.
Pardon? Say it again.
Poignancy.
I'm sorry.
Sorrow.
Oh, for sure. Yes. Sorrow. Loyalty, friendship, anything else? So let's move on and talk about Odile, okay? Let's talk about her childhood. Do you remember anything about her mother? Let's talk about her mother, because her mother does something that's very pivotal in this story. Odile's mother is very strong and controlling. And what does she do?
She ignores the idea or knowing that her husband has a mistress. She just ignores it and continues on her life as if it's just acceptable. That's maybe what Parisian men all do. I don't know.
Interesting take on that. Interesting. What else? Anything else you want to say about mother? So let me give you a clue, a hint, okay? Aunt Caroline. What does mother do? Remember?
Stops talking to her.
Not only stops talking to her, you're right. She banishes her, right? From the family. Why? Why? And this becomes so important in the story. Mother does not like that Aunt Caroline is getting a divorce. Because what does mother say? What will the people think? What will people say? She is so horrified. And she goes ahead and she cuts off her penniless sister. And of course, Odile sees that, right? Yeah. So Odile sees what her family thinks about, or her mother certainly thinks about divorced people, that it's a very low on the rung. And most of all, her mother worries more about what people will say than her own sister. So Odile sees this very heartless part of her mother. Remy, of course, doesn't, the son, but she does. Anything else you want to say about mother? Well, she's extremely controlling. She's controlling about the relationship with Paul, right? She's cute. It's cute. She used to come into Odile's room and say to her when she was reading in bed at night as a little girl, okay, lights out. And then she went ahead and did it when Paul would come over. She'd go into the living room and say, okay, lights out. So she was very controlling. The other person that is very pivotal in the story is her father. What do you remember about her father? Well, we know, first of all, he's a policeman. He's a commissioner, right? What else about the father? Anything else?
He wanted Odile to get married. That was very important to him.
All he wanted was for her to get married. That's it. Just get married. Did not want her to work. Certainly didn't want her in the library. Wanted her only to get married. Used to bring over suitors every Sunday, right? To have her choose somebody. And Odile, he was the kind of guy that also humiliated his kids when these guests would come. So that was pretty awful. What else about, what does the father do that's really quite unbelievable? Well, it turns out, if you remember, that when the mother finds out that Remy has been taken prisoner, right?
Mm.
What happens to mother? Do you remember?
She asks the father to do something and step in because of his position as a police officer.
Well, actually, what she does at that point, for in this part of the story, is that she actually has a breakdown. Do you remember that part? She
Yes.
has a breakdown when she finds out that Remy, her son, has been imprisoned in a Russian camp, and she now has a breakdown. And what does father do?
It's a German camp.
Pardon?
It's a German
In
camp.
a camp? Okay. What ends up happening? What does father do? What does the father do? He hires somebody to help her,
His-
and who's the person he hires?
His
Mistress.
girlfriend.
Yes.
He
His
hires his
mistress.
mistress. He hires his mistress. So she cannot believe that. Odile cannot believe that that's what her father has done, but he has done that. And all of a sudden, Odile has this horrible emotion about what's going on in her house. But eventually she softens because she sees that Eugenie, this mistress, is very wonderful to her mother, takes good care of her mother. And in fact, even her mother befriends her. By the way, there's a lot of humor in this story too. And I think there's a really funny thing in there, because all of a sudden there's one line where Odile is writing to her brother and she says, you know, Mama is recovering from her breakdown, but she likes to be waited on. Or she knows who the nurse is and she wants to make her suffer. Knowing Mama, it's a bit of both. So we don't know, does she realize or not who this nurse is? It turns out, of course, that in the end, Odile has very conflicted feelings about her father, because what does she learn at the very end, towards the end of the story, about her father's job? Do you remember that?
Of
What
course.
does her father do in the police department?
The
Do you
people
remember?
have been writing these crow letters, they call
That's
them, and it
exactly
was
right.
denouncing people for doing things that they feel are not right, like, so
Yes.
that the Parisians.
They were turning in their fellow neighbors, their friends.
Yes,
They were
that's what
turning in
they
the
do.
Jews, anybody who was foreign. They were writing these letters. I had never heard the expression crow letters, but it's actually very interesting, the idea of black-hearted people that would denounce each other. And her father's job was to go follow up on these people, go ahead and arrest them. And of course, we know that he does that. And ultimately, who does it with him? Who does it with him?
Paul.
Paul ends up doing it as well. Exactly. Okay, so she's very conflicted about her father. And of course, her father tries to answer her when she says, how could you be doing this? How could you be arresting these people? And he says, you know what? The truth is, I was told, he says, these are his words, if you find these actions distasteful, there are many other men who would like this job. So he's doing it to support the family. That's how he tries to justify this. And of course, what does Odile do? What does she do that's really quite amazing at that point?
She takes the letters. She goes in his office and secretly takes the letters.
She takes those letters, hoping that she can hold off these arrests. That's exactly what she does. And of course, her father confronts her and they have this conversation and he tries to justify what he's doing. What do we actually see about Odile? Like, what adjectives would you use to describe her? Well, what would you say, Evie?
Empathetic.
Very empathetic, very kind. What else would you say about her?
Loyal.
Very loyal, absolutely. What else? Any other thoughts about her? Well, what about the fact that she loves the Dewey Decimal System? What does that say about her?
Numbers. She loves numbers.
She loves numbers. What else does she love about? What does it say about a person who loves the Dewey Decimal System?
order. She loves order.
She loves order, everything being in the right place, right? In the right spot. Okay, okay, a very organized type of person. But she also has some very human traits as well. What were a couple of the negative traits perhaps that she had? Can you remember those?
Yes, she speaks without thinking.
She speaks without thinking. That's true, for
That's
sure.
how
She's in a lot of
got into
trouble.
trouble. That's why she has to leave.
Right.
And
What else?
By the
But
way,
by the way, what was the emotion that sparked that? Do you remember?
jealousy.
Jealousy, exactly. There's a lot of jealousy. She has jealousy.
I'm talking about
Exactly.
Margaret.
Right, she talked about Margaret. She has a real love of books, so let's talk about that. What did reading and books do for her? How did she look at books? How did she look at reading?
An escape.
It was an escape. Absolutely, it was an escape. What else did it do for her? Well, what do books do for all of us?
It opens the world.
It opens the world for you. Exactly. It opens the world. In fact, one of the lines that Odile uses, she says, books possess the mystical facility to make people see with other people's eyes. The library is a bridge of books between people and cultures. So that's exactly what it does. What else does it do? What else does it do? It offers great comfort when you're reading a book. And for that reason, when little Lily is feeling like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with this second wife of my father's? She gives her the book, The Outsiders, because in that book, it talks about a young girl who has to then get used to a new family and creating a new family. Books offer comfort as well. And what's interesting is she saw her life in a way as a metaphor to books. And I thought this was really interesting. Think about this one scene. I'm going to refresh your memory. Buck had died 4 years before. She was feeling, Odile, very, very lonely. And she says this, if my life had been a novel full of scenes, both dull and exciting, painful and funny, tragic and romantic, it was now time to reflect on the final page. I was lonely. If only my story would end, if only I were brave enough to close the book once and for all. And what was she doing when she says she's thinking of closing the book? What was she looking at in the closet? Do you remember?
A gun. She's looking at a gun.
the gun, at Buck's rifle, and she's looking at that. And of course, what is she planning to do at that very moment?
Kill herself.
Suicide, exactly. And then what happens at that very moment?
Lily knocks on the door.
Lily, exactly, knocks on the door. She rings the bell and she doesn't even realize that she is saving Odile's life. And Odile thinks to herself, well, when that doorbell rings, it seemed as if life had offered me an epilogue. So again, you see this beauty of the metaphor. What did the librarians actually do? How did the library staff and the subscribers react when the Nazis invaded? What were the choices they made? So starting with the first choice, what was the most obvious choice that they made?
To stay open.
Stay open, absolutely. And why did they do it?
For the
Their
subscribers.
Why?
For
Go
the
ahead.
subscribers to be able to use the library.
They wanted the subscribers to have a place to go, to continue going there. What else? Why else did they do it?
Defiant.
For what? Ethel, go ahead, what?
Defiance.
For defiance. It was their form of resistance. Absolutely, absolutely. What else? They were shipping books out to the soldiers. They were sending them to hospitals. They were sending them to the bases, and they were doing this, the books were doing for the soldiers just what they, what they were meant to do: offer comfort, offer support, offer escape. But the other thing that they did, the librarians, that was so brave at the time, what did they do that was so brave? Do you remember? Professor Cohen, what did she do, Odile?
She brought her the books that she wanted. She actually went to her apartment
She did. And so the librarians, when the Jews were no longer permitted to use the library, at that point, the librarians began to hand deliver books to the Jewish patrons. What's amazing is how they risked going through those dangerous checkpoints and they avoided the Nazis. And it's really amazing that they were able to do that. I want to talk for another minute about Remy. Remy, we know is, Remy is her brother. He is her twin. And what is the relationship that they have? What relationship does she have with him?
They were extremely close, very much bonded.
Very bonded. And she has a very close relationship and she feels very replaced by Bitsy, right? And yet her brother says to her, what does he say to her in his letters? He's encouraging her to do what?
Take care.
Don't wait for me to come home. What does he want her to do?
Befriend his fiance.
That's right. And all of a sudden she has a whole turnaround. She goes ahead and she befriends Bitsy once again because she realizes she does it for Remy. Exactly. What's interesting, by the way, about that relationship with Bitsy, it really evolves so beautifully. What you see is that when Remy dies, there's a beautiful line in there. She says, Odile and Bitsy were so close, they sobbed together. Our tears welding us together as sisters more than any wedding ever could. And in the end, if you remember, who does Odile write her goodbye note to when she leaves finally France at the very end of the story?
Bitsy.
She leaves it to Bitsy and she says to Bitsy, take tender care of Margaret, take care of our parents, tell them I'm sorry, take care of Professor Cohen's manuscript. And then she says she loves her like a sister, like a twin. I want to talk about Margaret because obviously Margaret and Paul and what happens there is very pivotal in the story. Talk about Margaret. What do we know about Margaret? What do we know about Margaret? How does she appear to you?
Well, at first she seemed kind of spoiled and you wouldn't think that she would take to the library. But once she started coming and volunteering, she became very connected to it and it made her life better.
It did. Remember that she married this guy who looked down at her with disdain. And it sounds like she might have had that feeling of being, a disappointment to her mother as well. There was a line in there about that her husband looked at her like the mother did, sort of with disappointment. And so here's this girl that doesn't feel very comfortable in France, and she is very unhappy. And she comes to the library, and like you point out, all of a sudden she's got a home, right? She feels important once again. In fact, she talks to Odile and she says, no one has ever looked at me the way you look at me, as though I'm brave and lovely and important. The other thing about Margaret is, what else? What other adjectives would you use for her?
She seemed to be a very loving and caring mother. Her daughter was important.
Caring mother, absolutely, which is why she's devastated at the end, right? But the other thing is she's a very generous person. She's so generous. How do we know she's generous? Do you remember how? Go ahead.
She lends her clothes.
She gives her clothes to borrow her clothing, and she's always giving her gifts. Exactly. And of course, we know that Margaret gets arrested, and we know that Margaret gets out of the prison. And of course, it is because she has developed a relationship with the German, right? And how does Odile feel about that?
Not well.
Not good. However, what does Odile do? She accepts the gifts, doesn't she, that the soldier gives to Margaret. And Margaret gives Odile chocolates and food and provisions to send to Remy. So Odile takes it. She takes those gifts. But of course, we know that she feels just terrible that Margaret would be having a relationship with this German. Now, why is that important? Margaret, in the end, makes a couple mistakes. First of all, the fact that she takes Odile in her confidence, that's number one. But then she does a couple things, little things that upset Odile. Does anyone remember those little slights that she does that upset Odile? She sort of dismisses at one point in a conversation in an offhand way. She dismisses the French army. Odile takes it very, as an insult to Remy. And then she talks about the fact that Bitsy might be sort of being overly dramatic about her mourning of Remy's death. And then the other thing is the fact that Bitsy dares to suggest that in time, Bitsy might find someone else. So Odile is so hurt by those comments. And Paul makes the mistake of trying to defend Margaret. And what happens to Odile when Paul says, well, she didn't mean anything by it? What happens to Paul? What happens to Odile? What does she do? She, all of a sudden, her resentment, her jealousy about everything that Margaret had, her resentment about the relationship with the lover, it all comes pouring out of her. And what does she do? She says to Paul, oh yeah, well, you're defending her? Well, listen, not everyone's a slut like Margaret. And then she tells him, of course, that she has a German lover. And of course, what does Paul do with that information?
Reports her.
Why does Paul have that feeling? What do we know about Paul? Remember that Paul used to make comments all over the place when he would see these soldiers with these girls. He would call the girls stuffed mattresses. Paul grew up in a home where his mother was a drunk, and very often he came home and he found his mother with men. And so he was, this really struck a chord with him. And then he hears this about Margaret, right? And he lashes out. He lashes out. And what does he do to Margaret? And he's with other guys. What does he do to Margaret when he sees her? Do you remember?
Cuts her hair.
Exactly. He lashes out with these guys. They beat her. They grab her pearls and they throw the pearls away and they throw her to the ground. And then Paul takes a knife and he cuts off, in a very violent way you can imagine, he cuts off her hair. And the most devastating part of that is that her husband does what? He takes photos of
He
her.
leaves her.
Pardon?
The husband leaves her because he knows that she was unfaithful. It was okay for him to be unfaithful,
Yes.
but not her.
Exactly. So he goes ahead, the husband goes ahead and he takes their daughter, and she is devastated now without her daughter. Her hair is cut off. She doesn't have her daughter. When Odile finds out about this, she comes running to Margaret and she says to Margaret, forgive me, forgive me. And remember that Margaret says a very interesting thing to her. She says, I can't forgive you. She says, Paul was the gun, but you pulled the trigger. What does she mean by that?
Paul was the one who physically hurt her, but if it wasn't for Odile telling Paul that Margaret had a lover, Paul would not have been so angry at her.
Exactly, exactly. So Paul really lashes out, and yet Odile is the one. And Odile knows this. She feels such guilt. She keeps trying to apologize. And Margaret says, I never want to see you again. And she gives her a parting gift. Do you remember what that was? A red leather belt. And if you remember, Lily, when she first sees Odile, they're always wearing that red leather belt. And Margaret's parting words to her are, I'm giving you this gift, and when you wear this belt, I hope you'll remember what you did and realize what it means to be a true friend. So you can see that Odile kept this forever. You know what I think was very skilled of the author? When we first met Paul, what did you think about him? In the very beginning of the story, he was portrayed as a really nice guy.
Nice guy, very
A nice guy,
Yes.
right? Loving, caring. He had sent his mother money. He helped his aunt with the harvest. He even refused a job in the father's precinct. If you remember, he didn't want Odile to misinterpret his relationship with her. He was a really good guy, and they had a very loving relationship, he and Odile. And then all of a sudden he does two things. What are the two things he does? The first one is what? What does he do that's so seemingly out of character? What does he do? Well, he goes, he has a job, and he does his job. He shows up at Professor Cohen's apartment. And what does he do?
Right.
He arrests her. He arrests her. And he had a choice. He could have walked out. He didn't. The question is, why didn't he? And the question is, why did he attack Margaret the way he did? Sure, he hated seeing the girls with the German soldiers. But what was it about Paul that made him do those two terrible things?
The reason he attacked Margaret or got so incensed with Margaret is because she had like pearls and beautiful things that he wished he would have been able to give Odile, I believe.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm not sure about the Professor Count.
Anyone have an idea why? What would make him do it with her? With Professor Cohen? So say it again. Judy, were you saying something? Anybody else have a thought?
To
I
get
want-
ahead at work,
He what? If you say it
for
again?
his own self-interest, to get ahead at work.
Absolutely right. It was his job. It was his job. And he was the kind of guy that did his job, and his job was to obey orders, and he did it. And it's interesting because he did it because his father, when you went back to his past, his father had shirked his responsibility and left the family, and he wasn't going to be like his father. So he did his job. And also what's interesting is Paul had been a policeman. Paul was carrying a weapon. He had an important job. And when the Germans came, what happened to him?
They gave
They
him
had-
They ran it. He didn't.
But that's right. But they went ahead and made him direct traffic. No longer did he carry a weapon, right? All of a sudden he was wiping graffiti off of German posters. So what you see is that this is a guy who was very humiliated. He followed orders and he gave in to his rage. And of course, we know that he's ashamed. What does he do at the end that makes us know he's ashamed of what he's done? What does he do at the very end?
He doesn't come to see, he doesn't come to Odile's house.
Eva, I can't hear you.
It takes him several days to overcome, and then he wants to marry her, and they do get married.
So-
He also has, I think, a bit of a bad feeling because he was not in the army.
Okay, so there were lots of reasons why he did what he did. And as you say, he feels guilty because remember, her mother is planning a wedding, and what does he do? He insists that they elope.
Yes,
And why does he do that? Why does he do that? Why does he say to her, marry me now, let's not wait this minute, let's go, just to the mayor's office, we can do it.
I think
Why does he do it?
he may be afraid that if she finds out he arrested Professor Cohen, he realizes they were very good friends.
He realizes that she will have no part of him afterwards, right? He is ashamed and he knows it exactly. So he does what he was ordered to do, but he knows that he did the wrong thing. You know, there's a very powerful line about Paul and the men when they attack Margaret. And this is what the author writes. The men hadn't planned to attack Margaret. They would never hurt a woman, never wanted to hurt one, but before them, here she was, a trollop in the dirt, foreign, eating while they went hungry, wearing a new dress while their women did without. She wasn't a woman to them anymore. They themselves had been beaten and humiliated, and now it was their turn to beat, to strike, to slash, right? So all of a sudden you see how this happens, all this emotion, all this resentment comes pouring out. What's interesting, by the way, is if you remember, who is the person in the story that writes the letter, some of these letters denouncing people, and in specific denounces Professor Cohen? Do you remember which of the people in the library turns against the professor and writes the letter? It's Madame Simon. Madame Simon, remember, she's the one with the dentures that don't fit her, the way the author describes her. And what I found very telling is that the author says that Madame Simon wrote the letters, and then she and her children moved into Professor Cohen's apartment. So what motivated them? What motivated them?
Greed.
Greed. What else? Jealousy. Jealousy. Why should Professor Cohen have this beautiful apartment? And of course, they wanted it. I want to just talk a little bit about Dr. Fuchs real quick, because he's, of course, the library, the protector. And here he's a German guy, but in a way, how does she portray him? How does she portray him?
As a human being, a lover of Miss, what was her name, Rita?
He was very close with Dorothy Reeder, exactly. She gives him human characteristics. You're absolutely right, Eva. She makes him, he's a friend of Dorothy's, and therefore he actually warns them. And you know, in the author's notes at the end, it's interesting about him because he was a real character. And what she says is that the French people were kind of conflicted about him at the end of the war. They liked him a lot, but they're also saying that history probably should have held him a little more accountable. So it was kind of interesting. Okay, so we have a question now. Why does Odile not, Judy, to your point, why does Odile not go back to France? Why does she give it all up? Why?
She's embarrassed.
She's embarrassed. She's embarrassed. Why?
She's humiliated of what she did, especially to her friend Margaret.
She hurt her so badly, she betrayed her confidence and betrayed her with terrible results. So she feels that way. Why else can she not go back?
Her mother, she doesn't want to ever face her mother because she knows how she felt towards the end.
That's exactly right. She knows that she will be banished from her family, so she doesn't have the library anymore to go back to. In truth, she doesn't want to go back to the library because of embarrassment, but also she wants it to still be a home for Margaret. And if she goes back, Margaret will never go back. So she does that for Margaret. That is her gift to Margaret by not going back. So then the question is, why does she marry Buck? Why does she marry this guy from Montana?
Escape.
Escape. Great. What else? Absolutely escape. Can't go further than Montana compared to Paris, right? What else? What else? She wants to reinvent herself, right? She wants to reinvent herself. So she shows up now in Montana and she meets Lily. And when Lily sees her, this is a woman who's very, very, she's a sad case. No one comes to visit her. She has no family. And Lily, here's Lily. Lily, remember we said she's a 13-year-old. She's just lost her mother. She's gone through a lot. She's endured the gossip of the pity of the friends of the mother. She's endured the second marriage of her father. And she's overworked by this stepmother, and she's got this good friend, Mary Louise, but she's a pretty pathetic girl when she meets Odile, and Odile turns out to be her life raft. So something changes. One thing happens, by the way, with Lily. What does Lily do that changes their relationship? Odile, and they're very close. Odile is teaching her. They have a wonderful relationship. And then Odile goes to Chicago. And what does Lily do?
Lily snoops in her house and finds the Crow letters
That's right.
because it was the insistence of her friend, Mary Louise, and she didn't want to be left out and lose her friend. So she went along with that, which just shows you once again how vulnerable Lily was. And
As
she
a
just
13-year-old, yeah, exactly. And Odile is upset, but she's not upset so much that they were snooping. Why is she so upset when she catches them?
Because she's shocked that Lily could think
shocked?
that she would possibly write those letters.
That's right. That's exactly right. She cannot believe that Lily would think this of her. How
Right.
could you think that I would do something so evil? And so Odile is heartbroken. And so Odile stops her relationship with Lily. She closes her off. And Lily is heartbroken over the fact that Odile won't accept her apologies, and Odile, and all of a sudden Lily realizes, it's like a light bulb goes off. And what does she realize, Lily? She realizes that Odile had been betrayed, had felt betrayed in her past life. And here she was betrayed again. And what did she do? When people betray you, what do you very often do?
Cut them off.
You cut them off, and you cut them off. And Lily is just heartbroken when she realizes this. And then there's a turning point for Lily, because all of a sudden, what does Odile do? She accidentally almost burns down her house, right? She's cooking the recipe of Professor Cohen's cookies, and she almost burns down the house. But the good news is she doesn't. She comes to Lily's house while her house is being renovated. And all of a sudden, it's a turning of events, because at that point, she opens up to Lily. And all of a sudden, she starts to tell Lily about her past. She shows her photo albums. She teaches her all kinds of lessons that she herself learned in her youth in France. And she tells her there are things that happened during the war that no one talks about, not even today. Things so shameful that we buried them in a secret cemetery and then forever abandoned the graves. So she really, up till now, has not wanted to talk about anything. And finally now, she breaks down and she's able to talk to Lily. And Lily is able to picture the people in the library. She feels close to them just through Odile, because of what Odile is telling her. What kinds of lessons does Odile teach Lily? And why is she the perfect teacher for Lily? Well, think about it. Think about Odile's past life with her own family. And here's Lily with her family. Do you see parallels? One parallel would be Odile's father, the police commissioner, was always working. He brings in his mistress. Odile has to get used to the mistress living in their house. She has to have a relationship with her. How does that compare to little Lily?
Lily's mother has the woman who's the mistress to her father taking.
No, that was Odile, but Lily's mother passed away. Lily's mother passed away, and so her father brings in
his girlfriend.
and wife. He marries the woman that was his girlfriend.
Right.
Exactly, yeah. So she has to get used to her. So Odile is teaching her, and what's beautiful is that because of Odile's teachings, Lily has a wonderful relationship. She develops a wonderful relationship with Eleanor. And there's a great little piece in there where all of a sudden Lily goes out one day with Eleanor, and they have such a lovely day when Eleanor takes her for a ride. Are you remembering the scene? And she says, it was so nice being with Eleanor. if we were French, this would be the moment that she would go from vous to tu, meaning what?
Formal to informal.
From formal to informal, care, loving to,
Mhm.
yeah, all of a sudden loving versus just formal.
More intimate.
Okay. So in the end, what do they actually do for each other, Lily and Odile? What do they do for each other?
I think they teach each other how to communicate.
Ah, excellent. How so?
Well, I think that it was difficult for Odile to talk to Margaret about her jealousy, and keeping that bottled up led to her to tell Paul. And she didn't want to make up with Lily because of the betrayal, but I think she learned that, talking about things is better than staying mad with someone that you're close to.
She learned a lesson from Lily a little too late, but for her France experience, but yes, you're right. She learned a very important lesson in that way. What else? What else does Odile learn from Lily? Remember how Odile never spoke to the ladies at the church. She
Oh,
had no
yeah.
friends, no relationships. And at the very end, what does Lily say to her? You know what? She says, you need to really reach out to them. They're nice and they're trying very hard with you. So she's
Right.
really trying to open up her world. And so she wants to open up Odile's world in Montana. And what does Odile do for Lily? What does she do for her?
Gives her the trip
Gives
to
her the-
Paris.
Ticket.
Gives her that trip, gives her that ticket to France, right?
Right.
And what is that doing for Lily? What is that going to do for her?
It's going to open her eyes to a world.
It's going to absolutely open up her eyes to the world. Exactly. It's going to give her the opportunity to reinvent herself, to get out of Montana, right? And reinvent herself,
To move on.
to move on. Exactly. And that's really what Lily also is doing for Odile. I don't know about you, but at the end of the story, I was a little sorry that there weren't two tickets to France.
I thought the
I
same
was
thing.
too.
Right.
And Lynn,
It was Lily.
Judy, I think you went mute. Did you?
so my question, she was going to go to college, Lily.
Yes, and she was
Yes.
going to, but this was for her summer trip. Yeah.
Right.
So do we assume it was only for the summer?
Yes.
Just for this
Yeah.
summer. It was a summer.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that was what I was hoping would be a summer experience, and then she would grow from that and go on to college.
Exactly.
Yes.
A summer.
But I would have liked 2 tickets,
I know.
absolutely.
So what about this? Listen to this. There was the line in there where Lily says, well, what am I going to do? I don't know anyone in France. Where am I going to live? Where am I going to go? Who do I know? What does she tell her?
She is going
Gives
to,
her something.
she gives her the name of someone.
She gives her the postcard. And the postcard is
like
the
it.
postcard of the American Library. And it says on it, American Library, gives the address, gives the phone number, and it also says open daily. So what is she hoping is going to happen? What is the assumption? What's going to happen when Lily gets to France?
She'll meet her old friends, and I think Boris becomes her very good friend.
Boris is going to become a good friend. All of them are going to be good friends.
That she's going to meet Margaret.
And she's going to meet Margaret and
She'll meet Bitsy.
what?
Bitsy, she'll meet
She's
Bitsy.
going to meet Bitsy. She's going to meet all of these people. Exactly.
I think
The
Bitsy
whole-
will take her into her home.
Right, right. So she's going to have a whole built-in friend base, right, when she gets there. So that's a really interesting thing. And I'll just share with you one interesting thing at one of the last paragraphs in the book. It says that she gives her the postcard of the American Library. And it says the postcard, which by the way, Debbie, are you there? Debbie? What I was hoping, I have a couple,
Yes,
Debbie, do we have time to show a couple of those images?
Yeah, I'll show them right now. Let me pull it up.
So what I want to show you is a couple of images because what the author did is she went back to the archives and she actually found pictures of the library in 1939. And you're going to see, she also is going to show us a picture of the postcard that was given to Lily, okay, at the very end. Okay, good. And you're going to see all these characters that we just read about, okay?
Hold on
Good.
one second.
Debbie, let me know when you're ready.
Okay, I'm gonna share the screen and I can get, you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh, wait, Debbie, let me just, can I read over this for a second?
Yeah.
It says that Lily, this is the last paragraph of the book. When I turned over the card, remember it was a postcard, and I saw the picture, the answer became clear who I would meet. In front of a majestic old mansion, there was a pebbled path bordered by pansies or maybe petunias. Standing inside, looking out the window, was a woman in a white hat whose face was hidden by that sweeping brim of her hat. Underneath were the words, American Library in Paris, open daily. Okay, so that's how she closes the book. So now this will be fun for you to see.
great.
Okay.
And I do want to say, so this is a very short part of a whole discussion that the author had through the American Library in Paris. And it's actually a really interesting conversation if you have time to watch it. It's on YouTube. So I don't know if we can send that out, or if you want the link, please email me and I'll send it to you. But it's interesting because she had worked for the library and it's just a very interesting conversation she's having with somebody who's there currently. So, okay, I'm gonna play it right now.
Okay, so these are the images, yeah.
With the Paris Library. And this is a map of Paris. So
By the way, this is the author who's moderating for you guys in the upper right-hand
that
corner.
is our train station. And this is the Saint Augustin Church that Odile would have seen that I just described. And we can see the library is not so far here. Well, this is the library in 1939. Staff come from the US, Canada, Russia, France, Switzerland, and England. Our story starts here. I have to say that these days, the staff is just as international and speak just as many languages. This was one of my first finds online. I spent my days at the Bibliothèque Nationale reading the Paris edition of the New York Herald Tribune, reading back issues of Library Journal. I just wanted to know what life was like for librarians in 1939 and 1940, what their concerns were. And then in the evening, I would go home and I would keep researching. I would look up Dorothy Reader, the American Library in Paris. And so this was one of the first things that I found online, this beautiful information card about the library with its address on the Rue de Guérin. I love that there are only 4 digits for the telephone number, 2810, and there are so many buses. Very interesting, not as many buses today. This is a photo, you can see it's the same photo. This is the inspiration for my character, Margaret. I love the wide brim of her hat, and I wonder what secrets she's doing. I bought this from the Chicago Tribune. So it was really in Googling nonstop every day. Archive are adding, they're scanning information and putting it online every day. There are just more things put up on the internet. So this was one of my finds. This is another one of my finds. This was a photo that I bought off of eBay for $24.99. It just stuns me that our history is just floating around for sale on the internet. This is Dorothy Reader, and as I said earlier, she came to Paris alone in 1929. She started at in the periodical room, and she worked her way up to the role of directress in 1936. On June 12th, 1940, just before the Nazis invaded Paris, she sent her staff away for their own safety, but she remained at the library. She dealt with Dr. Fuchs, the Nazi library protector. The Nazis had pillaged the Russian, Polish, and Ukrainian libraries in Paris. Certain people may not enter, he stated, meaning Jewish people. So Miss Reader and her colleagues delivered books to Jewish members. Will say that I'm very glad the librarians, American Library in Paris today do not have to get up on chairs to do publicity photos. It's more about the minds. So I love that. Here's another photo. This is Clara de Chambran, one of the original trustees, along with the writer Edith Wharton. During World War II, she was the only trustee to remain in Paris. The others returned to the safety of the States. She was summoned to the office of the Nazi Library Protector as well. The ALP had been denounced because its collection contained anti-German journals and cartoons. Here we have Boris Nechayev. He lied about his age to join the army so that he could take part in the Russian Revolution. He and his brother came to Paris hoping for peace, but instead found themselves in the middle of another war. He arrived in Paris in 1925. He worked at the library as a page and worked his way up to head librarian. Originally from Russia, he served. During the occupation, the Gestapo shot Boris and took him prisoner. He survived and worked at the library until he retired. Here he is holding his daughter Helene in his arms. I was thrilled to be able to interview her for the book. He was shot through the lung, and Helene was in the next room when it happened. She said that he made a full recovery and never stopped smoking when she didn't cigarettes. You'll notice that he is standing in front of the library. You can see from the picture that I showed you earlier. So you can see where they're standing. And here we have a photo of the staff. Here is Dorothy Reader, and every picture I see her in, she looks a little different. Here's Boris.
Yeah.
Here are the Canadian, Evangeline, and Olivia Turnbull, a mother-daughter team. I absolutely love that there was a mother-daughter team working at the library, and I'm missing my mom and thinking how wonderful it would be to work with my parents. It would be lovely to see them every day. Here is the library love story, Helen Fickweiler and Peter Ustinov. I was able to interview their daughter and granddaughter for the book, and their daughter Elizabeth was helpful to the library. She was able to identify some people in the archives.
Great, thanks, Debbie.
Sure, hold on, let me just stop the share this.
So I wanted just to make sure that everybody realized, so what's so cool about the way she ends the book is she's sending her a picture, actually. Who's the woman in the white hat? It's Margaret. So what you see is that she's really sending her to the library, and of course, with the idea that she's going to meet up with Margaret. So if you're like I am, who always wants a happy ending, I want to believe that little Lily is going to get there. She's going to talk to Margaret. She's going to get them together again. So, we'll see. We'll see. Anyways, any other comments that anyone wants to make that we did not cover in the book?
I would like to say something, Lynda. I have a confession to make. Debbie and Lynda know this. I read the wrong book. I read a book called The Paris Librarian, which had absolutely no redeeming value. And I could not understand why in the world it was chosen. It was a murder mystery. I never finished it. But I have to say, Lynda, this book sounds fabulous. And the photos at the end just are thrilling. So I thank you so much for your brilliant storytelling. And I cannot wait to read the right book.
I do want to say one thing, Kathy. I sent that email to you yesterday and I said, and I'm sure knowing you, Kathy, after Linda's discussion, you are going to want to book. And
yes, I can't wait. I really can't wait. And I know a friend who will just love it.
Yeah, it's great.
So thank you.
What I think, I always say this after the books that we read, not everybody will love every book, but what is really powerful about reading, and especially when we do these kinds of books that are historical fiction, you learn so much. That's the beauty. How many of us even knew about this library? I don't even think we realized, how many libraries were pillaged in World War II. I don't think so. So, we really learned a lot from this book. And again, the author did a lot of research and she shared so much with us.
And Lynda, as always, we thank you so much for leading that discussion so beautifully. And I had said to Lynda, like, I'm not sure if I love this book so much, but the thing is that when she and I had a discussion, she's like, what about this and what about that? And I was like, yeah, you're right. And then listening to it again today. So thank you for showing me to look at the book in another way as well. And I appreciate that every month that you do this. So
thank everybody for their participation. Great.
We invite you again to come next month to the discussion about oil and marble. If you have not already registered for the online, it is available. It is also, again, going to be in person. So it's in person at the Sterling Road Library on the 16th and online on the 17th. So we hope that you will enjoy reading the book. We hope you'll enjoy either in person or online with us next month. And Lynda, travel safely. And we'll
I want to just mention one thing. They do not have many copies in the library, which is unfortunate. So what I was going to suggest, somebody told me that you can download it for free with an app called Hoopla.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So go ahead and if you can't get a hold of the book, go ahead and download it that way.
You're saying even Broward, the Overdrive doesn't have a lot?
I don't know. I don't know. I know that they were talking, when we originally did these choices, it was during COVID and nobody was really using the library. So we weren't worrying too much about the numbers of books. From now on, we're going to always make sure there's enough books for everybody, but yeah.
Okay.
So thank you everybody for joining us today. Happy reading until we see you again.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you so
Bye,
much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Special
Thank
thanks
you
to
again. Bye.
Debbie. Deb for reminding me. Thank you, Dora.
Thank you.
I'm homesick. I'm a little sick. I had COVID, but it's okay.